Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Core Brands podcast. Today is a guest episode, and I have the pleasure to have with me today Mary White, a trademark and design attorney at Merge Detroit. Mary has over 25 years experience in the intellectual property area, and I would like you to welcome Mary with me. Hi, Mary. Welcome to the show.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Roberta. It's a real pleasure to be here. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Mary, I just gave a little intro about yourself. Would you like to tell us a bit more about the work that you do?
Sure. Thank you. I have been, working for quite a long time now, and I began life helping grow people's businesses. And it was only part way into that career that I discovered intellectual property and what that means. And I guess it was a bit of an eye-opener for me to understand just how much of the world around us is invisible and intangible. And yet it's terribly important. And I suppose when I was sort of working in other people's businesses, I was often looking at what they did that made them a little bit unique or a little bit different. And I didn't really think as much as I would maybe now about copycats and about, people coming along and seeing that you have a great business idea and wanting to have a little piece of that pie for themselves. But I think we've all become more aware of these kind of issues in the last number of years. And certainly once I came across the idea of intellectual property, I found, wow, this is really interesting. It's a really interesting area to work in. And it really adds a new dimension when you start thinking about your business in terms of not just the tangible things that we can see and feel, but also the intangibles. And you realize they're all around you all the time. All these, I suppose, fruits of the imagination, all of the super things that people come up with from creativity. So that might be the design of a product, not just the actual how it works. Maybe it's a new technology, maybe it's something great. We've all seen incredible advances in technology in our lifetimes now. And I think what makes my job so interesting is that there's always new innovations. There's always new inventions. There's always new designs. There's always new brands coming to the fore. And that's really what keeps life interesting and exciting and engaging, to have all of this creativity and just to be aware of that, and the fact that it takes a huge amount of effort to take something from having an idea in your mind to actually executing it and seeing it become real in the real world. We all know, as founders and as entrepreneurs and as business owners, we know how much effort that takes. So yeah, it's been an interesting discovery of this, and it's really, I suppose, been the story of my life ever since. So I'm really proud to be a trademark attorney and to help brands to protect their identity and to protect their innovations. And I've been doing that now for quite some time. It's starting to get old.
Thanks, Mary. So for our listeners, if we break down in simple terms, what is intellectual property? Is this just the designs? Is it just the idea, the patent? What consists of intellectual property?
That's a great question, Roberta. And I suppose one of the quick things that I would always say to people is, well, the clue is in the word property. So we think about, a property, you might think about owning a house or owning a car or something like that. And it is all about ownership, but it's ownership of the thoughts that you have and how you turn them into reality. It's ownership over ideas and ownership over the expression of those ideas in particular. So, because it's very hard to own something when it's only in your head. I mean, literally, if it's inside your head, no one else can really see it or touch it. So it's kind of secret, isn't it? It's within your own mind. But once you actually bring a product to market, it's apparent to everybody what it is. And if that's an exciting new product, you can bet that other people are going to be like, wow, that's so cool. Maybe I can make something similar. So for businesses who are putting in a lot of effort into the research and the development and the experiments, some of which won't work, we all know that when you're developing something new, there's an awful lot of trial and error that can be costly. And there might be literal kind of experiments that you need to do. You might need to go and hire somebody to help you with the science bits. Or maybe you are the scientist and you need to go and hire somebody to help you with the marketing of this thing. So it could be an innovative product. It might be an innovative service. It might actually be just a new twist on an older product or service, something that's an incremental innovation. But it's really taking something that you've put a bit of creativity into and then saying, well, hang on, what did I put into that? What's mine in this? And how do I hold on to the value of the part I've brought? So we can't own things that someone else has invented. Obviously, that belongs to somebody else, whether they're enforcing it or not, but it's not ours. So that's probably the fundamentals of it, is ownership of the value of what you personally or you and your business have created. And that's as simple as IP is. It's just literally ownership. So if I was to come into your house and trespass on your house, it would probably call the guards and say, please remove this person from my house. And, the guards might say, well, which one of you actually owns the house? And the rightful owner will hold up the deeds of the house, or maybe will hold up their mortgage statements and say, well, I've got something to back that up. I can show you it's mine. So I think that's really why IP rights are important. So there's the actual intellectual property, which is, the creativity that you've put into it, but then there's showing the ownership. And that's why people sometimes think, oh, intellectual property only refers to the rights. Well, it's really, I suppose, the rights are there like the deeds of a house. Your business might be the equivalent of the house. It's what you're showing that you've put into it. And like I say, what you personally did or what your business has achieved in that is the part that's unique to you, that's protectable.
Yeah, that's a great metaphor, Mary, about the house and the ownership. I'm just sometimes, and from my experience as a brand designer and working with new brands all the time, I feel like people don't really have much clarity, and they don't really, most of the times, I don't want to be unfair. The idea that I have is that, oh, that's just a trouble. Looking now into IP and trademark my logo, trademark my brand name. Do you see that as well on your work, or do you have a different perception?
I do, Roberta. Yeah, I do. I do see it as well. Sometimes, I think when people are designing a brand, it's important to think about two sides. You need to think about the commercial side. So, what's going to work for my consumer? What will they love? What will be attractive, memorable, and fit the personality that you really want for your product? So if your customer is young and trendy, or maybe, they're a serious character who wants something trustworthy, maybe your ideal character is going to be, very businesslike and wants something that is utilitarian. So, there's elements of people's developing of a brand. And then I suppose there's also then the legal side. So you can come up with a brand that's fantastic commercially and consumers will love it, but it's difficult then to protect because maybe it's a bit generic or it's ordinary English words or something like that. And they can be difficult to have a monopoly right over as such. So putting a bit of personality in, as you do with all your brands, putting a bit of personality and a bit of uniqueness into it helps to elevate something that's commercially successful into something that's also legally protectable, kind of that you can actually get the deeds of the house. As if I was making an apartment block and all the apartments are exactly the same, it would be difficult for me to say, well, mine is special and unique, when actually it's just the same as every other, home on the block.
Yeah. So you'd say, for example, because I work mostly, I would say, with service-based owners, so they don't have like a physical product that they're selling. It's mostly like they're selling just services. Would you say that they should be looking at maybe trademarking their business name, their brand visual identity, like their logo? And what about any words or any methods and processes that they come up with and they're unique? Is that something that it's important as well?
I get asked a lot of similar questions, so they're really useful and valuable questions. I guess if you are selling a service, then essentially to a degree, you might be selling your own time, and your own identity comes along as part of the brand. People trust the person that they know will deliver a fantastic service. So it can sort of reflect a personal brand at times when it's a service-led industry, if it's a, founder who's maybe also delivering services themselves. So oftentimes then it will be attached to a human name. And there's pros and cons to having, a human name as the driving force inside your brand. I guess that's true of someone called Mary White. I mean, there's a clothing brand called Mary White who have a trademark for that. So my name is common as muck, you might say, and difficult to have a monopoly right over because there's already trademarks out there for Mary White. So I guess if you have a more unusual name, then perhaps it's a little bit more possible to have a greater uniqueness to that, something that would be different. Of course, we've all seen recently the Beckham saga, where Brooklyn isn't too pleased because the name that he has been given from birth is also unfortunately part of an IP portfolio. Of course, names are known to cause trouble if somebody wants to maybe exit a brand. So if I build up a brand and I call it Karen Millen, and I want to go off and sell that brand or Estee Lauder or any other name brand, there are plenty of them in history, but I use Karen Millen because this literally happened. It also happened with, say, Bobbi Brown makeup, that the founder might exit and then they need to, begin again. They want to start their own brand again. So with Bobbi Brown, we see her having started Jones Road because she can no longer use the name Bobbi Brown in respect of cosmetics that she wants to sell or makeup services. So it's an interesting thing. We see this with designers as well, fashion houses and things like that. So it's a very interesting thing to be your own brand's core identity. Very often that limits businesses in terms of scale as well. If the business is built entirely on one person, sometimes it's difficult then, because I'd be saying, oh, well, here's my colleague, Joe White, but people would be like, am I going to get the same service from Joe that I would get from Mary? So it may be better to, if you're planning on scaling, to think about having a name that covers not just you personally, but everyone who's working with you or for you. So we see that with, law firms that end up with funny names that might be 2 or 3 different lawyers that have got together to practice as a whole. Again, over time, I think we're seeing more and more of those now consolidating and trying to simplify their names because it's more modern sounding and it's simpler, it's easier to remember. So, it's interesting how personal brands can evolve into bigger brands. And a lot of that comes down to scale. But to your point about how to actually, protect the service itself, you've got the name of the business, which may well be worth protecting. And then you've got maybe logos or the names of particular service offerings that you have. So that might be, a particular program that you run or a particular, kind of service structure that you have, and you want to give that a special name. So it's about using a bit of creativity, I suppose, to actually brand the service as opposed to brand you as a person, if you want to see it that way. You can put a name on a service too. So if we think about how people can build IP into their business or deliberately create names, logos, and other assets. So maybe things even like, icons or whatever that you might use within your business. They may not be something you need to trademark, because an icon is typically something quite simple. So I wouldn't necessarily say it's trademarkable, but it might be something that becomes symbolic of you if it's actually got a little bit of individuality. A little bit of uniqueness and its own identity that's not quite the same as anybody else's. So, for example, I'm not going to manage to monopolize a smiley, but I certainly might use particular uniquely designed graphics from my website that help my customers say, oh, I am in the right place. This is the right business. And a lot of it comes down to that. Like, a trademark really is a badge of origin, a badge of identity. So I know as a consumer who I'm buying from. And whether it's a product or a service doesn't really matter. It's those visual clues that we've depended on as human beings for hundreds of years, back to hallmarks for our silver, or, the particular types of markings that bakers would put on their bread so that people would know, oh, you got that from the best baker in the village. And it's really about use of sort of visual cues to reference who you're buying from. So yeah, it's really interesting when we've got services like that. You also mentioned business frameworks and models. Very hard really to quantify those in a way that you could maybe legally monopolize, because they tend to be a bit nebulous and they evolve over time. And, even where there is quite a strict structure, it's often more a case of like a structure of an essay for your leaving cert. We all know we're going to have a beginning, a middle and an end. We're going to have a storyline, the narrative that will follow, but each report that you're going to generate will be a bit different. So how do you then protect that? Well, each one individually might be protected by copyright, considering as you're creating unique content for each of those reports. But as a systematic fashion, it's difficult to prevent people from having a similar structure or even using somewhat similar words, because they're probably ordinary English language and you can't really monopolize ordinary language. So it's tricky really with regard to those structures, unless, as I say, you deliberately design in elements that help to tell people, that help to reference to people that they're really yours. And again, something visual often works for the human touch. Now, if we're looking at AI and how machines read things, that's completely different. And I think that's a very interesting thing for brand design in the future, that now we need to think almost twin track. We need to appeal to the humans, but we also need to appeal to the tech in the room. And that means branding having a digital strategy as well as a human facing strategy to be picked up, not just by SEO, which kind of, I suppose, had been a huge issue, being sure that you would be picked up, by search engines, but now also being sure you'll be picked up and understood in the right way by generative AI and all those different, AI assistants that are out there. So we're seeing this in a whole new light now, really, of how are we going to be perceived as an individual, as a business, and also with our digital thumbprint as such, or our digital symbolism. So it's all taking a rather interesting turn now.
Yeah, very interesting. And I'm glad you brought the AI topic, because that was kind of like fitting into my next question. So as a brand designer, I often hear people telling me, like, if I go out for a dinner or meeting some friends, the first thing people tell me is, sure, you're afraid of losing a job now because AI can do what you do. And while I feel rest assured that my job is safe because it does not even come close to the human touch a designer bring to branding, I see a lot of brands out there creating their logos, their presentations, their assets with AI, and they look very generic, and you don't even have to have a trained eye to see it was created by AI. So when is it going to be too late for those brands when they realize I'm not original, I'm not protected? Now do I need to go all the way back and start over? Not sure if my question makes much sense, but
it really does. Yeah, it really does make a lot of sense. I would agree with you. I don't think AI will be replacing the likes of your good self, for the foreseeable. I don't think it's likely to replace humans at all, but I certainly don't think it's going to replace skills and experience and human judgment in that way at all. It's a wonderful tool. I'd be the first person to say AI is an incredible tool. It saves a lot of time with certain types of tasks, and no doubt it will continue to evolve and be able to do more. But you've put your finger on the nub of the issue right there, Roberta, by saying that, you didn't actually create this, and therefore you're not an author in this process. You're not creating something. AI is creating something. And one of the most important things that people can learn about intellectual property is that if you didn't create it, then you don't have any right to claim ownership over it. So if I go along and I use ChatGPT to create an image, it's not my copyright in the image, if you know what I mean. It's an image that has been generated by a machine based on machine learning, based on a data set that it has trained from. Quite right that it is going to be based on kind of generic concepts for a lot of what is currently output, and I don't know if in future it will become capable of greater shall we say, wildcard additions into its data set. But I think, at the end of the day, really what we're seeing in terms of people's outputs, they're generally not what I would call sort of, surprising. They fall into a category where they tend to be generic. And that's, of course, extremely difficult to protect. And one of the interesting things about that is it echoes an actually human mistake as well, because very often when people are setting up their first company or their first, business, they might come along and say, well, I want to have a name that's descriptive. I want to tell people who I am and what I do in one or two words. And unfortunately, that's the exact same trap of falling into something that's quite generic or something that's very ordinary. And if it's ordinary, then it's not very distinctive. And that's a huge issue, both legally and commercially. If you're not distinctive, how are people going to really choose you again and again? So if I set up a business and I call it Dublin Doors and Windows, there's nothing to stop someone else coming along and opening, a similar business across the street and calling it Doors and Windows of Dublin, or Dublin, Doors, Windows and Tiles. So it's very difficult to tell several similarly named businesses apart. And it's very difficult to tell the difference between two or three visually similar logos. Really, we've all seen fairly logos and you wouldn't remember them 5 minutes later. And especially if you walk into a situation 2 or 3 days later and you're looking at a shelf, you're looking at a product and you say, is that the same or not? You can barely remember the previous, brand. We all think we know brands really well. When we actually see them, if they're a good brand, they will trigger a memory for us. But we know when we go into a discount supermarket, you could look around and at a glance, you might think something is a big brand product. And then you look a little more closely and you're like, oh no, it's actually somebody who's copied the major features, and we see how, this has led to copycats and dupe culture where people are saying, well, I want something that's like that, but cheaper. And I mean, we even have that as a sort of slogan, don't we, for some discount supermarkets where they're sort of saying like brands only cheaper. And I think that's sort of the risk inherent in that AI slop approach, where we're churning out more and more sort of similar-ish looking stuff, is that it might not really stand out and it might not fulfill the essential function of a brand, which is to stand out and be unique and memorable.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's going to be really hard to replace the human thinking that goes behind building a brand from end to end. And I think, as you said, AI is great. I use it every day for various different tasks. I think it really accelerates and improves my time. But there are certain things where human touch is really key. And that's what makes the brand distinctive at the end of the day. And as you said as well, you cannot really trademark a smile or a square or a circle, but there are some features that you can bring into those shapes that can make them really unique. Either it's the stroke or, the pattern, the texture. So yeah, I'm really curious about this topic and I keep my ears open all the time to hear what people think. I think it's really, really interesting to see where AI goes with this originality and intellectual property as well. So did you have, Mary, any example of brands coming to you looking for advice for trademark products or any other assets, and that you had to tell them, listen, this is not going to be easy to trademark?
Unfortunately, sometimes I do. And if I had a top tip to give to people, it would definitely be, to put in a little extra mile when you're developing your brand. Because even if I can, be lucky and help you obtain a trademark where you have a kind of a weak mark, the downside is that, it's going to cost an awful lot more in terms of enforcement. If you have something that's unusual, maybe a bit out there, you might think, wow, will anyone know what that is initially? Chances are, they might not. So you have to put a bit of effort into the education of your consumer. But the main thing is if you've got a great product and you do educate them, they'll remember that because it's unique and different and it'll stick in their head. Education is a one-time thing, whereas confusion is a forever thing. So it's really, really hard to make something that's generic become something that has acquired a distinctiveness just through repeated use. You can do it, but the level of repeated use you have to create. So if we took a name like Waterford Crystal, for example, that literally just means, a glass product from the county of Waterford. And only because of the company's incredible length of use and international repute and fame, would the words Waterford Crystal perhaps be strong enough to actually achieve a level where a consumer would say, oh no, I actually recognize that as a brand. It's not just a description of glass that's been made in a county. It actually refers to a particular highly skilled factory where people have really learned how to make beautiful, beautiful pieces. So imbuing a weak brand with strength is very difficult. Whereas if you start with something strong, then you can educate around it so much easier. So that would probably be my top tip for people is, really do try and go the extra mile and come up with something that is unique. Yes, I have lots of top sort of tips for people who come along. They're like, oh, I've been using this name for 3 years and I love it. I don't want to change it. But it's very problematic because I've had 6 people open similar named businesses around the country and I keep having to write them letters to tell them that I've got rights or whatever. So, you pay for it in the long run, even if you're lucky, because you have much more work to do to keep trying to enforce something that is generic. And it's much more likely that someone else will accidentally infringe on you too. This is not necessarily all bad people getting up in the morning wanting to copycat. It's just that the words are commonplace, and so they'll pop into everybody else's head the same way they popped into yours. So if it comes to you and you think that's really great, that describes exactly what I do, unfortunately, that's exactly what everyone else who does a similar thing is going to think. So it is a really good way of seeing it that you aren't just coming out with a descriptor, you're coming out with something that will pique people's interest. And again, that's why I'd often say, look, much as I do think IP is an incredible asset to have and so useful to businesses who know how to use it, I would say as well, like, there's very little point in having an IP right unless you are going to actually benefit from it, and that you could be very, very busy trying to enforce a name. But if it's not serving that unique identifier function, well, then why are you doing it? So invest first in your type of skill, Roberta. That would be my advice. Invest in developing the great brand first, and then, say, well, now that I've really worked on my brand, now's the time to really think about it. And that comes back to the AI thing again. It's great to have brainstorming. It's wonderful to have iterations. Not everyone comes up with a masterpiece on their first go, but the more you work on something, the more drafts and iterations you do, the better you refine it. And the more experience we bring into it, we always improve things as we go along. And that's one of the kind of cognitive friction things, a bit uncomfortable. I'm sure you go through many drafts when you're preparing something for a client, even though you present something that's finished at the end and it looks fantastic, but you've gone through that process of creation, scrapping it, developing it, pulling ideas from here and there, and all of that work that you've done to draft and redraft and reconsider and experiment, that process of actually innovating, it's time consuming, it takes effort. It certainly isn't something that ChatGPT can pull together in a matter of minutes, because ChatGPT will pull together the lowest common denominator.
Yeah.
It's not going to create, something that's really been thought through with that kind of grit and cognitive friction that we only get really when we brainstorm and puzzle over things and, seek feedback and iterate. So I think those are probably my tips, is that, yeah, a bit of effort is really worth it at the start. And then when you have something much more valuable, you will get much more bang for buck from your IP protection afterwards. It would be easier to enforce. It's less likely there'll be accidental infringements because it's so unusual and different. So yeah, those would be my top tips for brand owners around how not to fall down the most common pitfalls anyway.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Mary. Then, and when it comes to enforcing, like, let's say that you see someone is copying you, and we see that so often lately online. What can we do to stop it, to make it stop? Is there any guidance you can give to listeners, just in case they're listening and they need that bit of extra clarity?
Yeah, I know. I mean, it definitely is a horrible thing to go online and find that somebody has created something that it looks like it's piggybacking off the success that you've been creating. You've put blood, sweat, and tears into your brand and your product and your service. And for someone to come along and ride on your coattails seems grossly unfair. So what I would say is, it's not uncommon. You're absolutely correct. The digital world is making it much easier for people to copy things, as indeed is social media and AI. All of these tools are making information so accessible. And once we put things out there in the world, like I said, if it's an idea in your head, no one can get it out, but you can't sell it either. Whereas once you put it out there and you start to market a product, you start to market a service, and you make it, visible, then people can see it. So the first step is just awareness. Say, look, if I put it out there, people will see it. So, would I take my child and throw them out on the street without having thought about, what's going to happen to them? No, you wouldn't. And you wouldn't do that with your business baby either. Like, I do think many founders, they would say, oh, my business is my baby, almost my other baby. So, and I think if we think about it in that way, we wouldn't send things out unprotected. You just like you wouldn't send your child out to skateboard without putting on their knee pads or their helmet. So if you've got a great brand and it's dear to you, I think it is worth thinking about putting on some protective layers. So that's exactly what IP rights are there for. If something is becoming valuable to you, it may be really worthwhile saying, well, what comeback would I have if somebody was to try to copy this? So identify what are the critical elements. You don't need to have 2,000 different trademarks, but what you do want is to identify the right things, which might be the name, could be the logo, might be a bit of both. Whatever it is that you feel, well, that's the bit that would upset me if someone was to copy that. And again, if it's a generic feature, it's very difficult to protect. Whereas if it's a unique feature, it's much easier to protect. If you think about a fancy perfume bottle, for example, it may well be in the shape of a shoe or a robot or a flower or whatever. That's unusual and distinctive. So that's difficult to copy. So a knockoff perfume probably won't come in a bottle that looks anything like the original. And that's how we know, hey, this is the premium product. And that more expensive packaging is reflective of the more I suppose innovation that went into developing the fragrance in the first place. But in terms of practical steps, if you have IP rights, yes, that makes your life much, much easier because, as I say, you can hold them up and say, well, look, there's the deeds to the house. There's no disputing who owns it. So I would say go armed, have those in your back pocket. And then, it's good to approach the other party. And you can either do that yourself or you can get some assistance from a lawyer or solicitor to help you to do that, or a trademark attorney, like I would do from some of my clients. But essentially, you just need to, first of all, start by letting them know that you have rights in whatever it is. So if it's that they've copied your name or if they've copied your product design or whatever it might be. And so you need to put that to them and say, look, I'm the proprietor of this trademark and I can attach a copy of my certificate and say, I have rights to that in respect of the following goods and services, which you'll have listed as part of that trademark. I think that just even the exercise of putting in a trademark application is very good because it helps you refine what do I own and in respect of what, because people do make mistakes about that. I'll come back to that point in 1 second. But essentially, if you know what it is that you're trying to protect and you put your case forward, a lot of people will realize that they're in the wrong and will realize that, actually, they do have a legal right and I will only get myself into a deeper hole. So the first thing to do is do that and do it quickly. It doesn't necessarily have to be a mad confrontation every time. Many, many people accidentally infringe, and when it's brought to their attention, they'll remedy it, And oftentimes that might mean having a little bit of a compromise where you say, well, look, I'll give you 6 weeks to work out your packaging or change your website. I don't expect you to do it overnight tonight, but I do want it done within a period of time. Maybe you have a certain amount of stock and you need to get rid of that stock. So we'll agree that you won't have any new products with that. Sell off the stock you have. We'll give you 3 months to sell the stock. And I think if it happens to you that you're on the receiving end, that type of approach where you say, okay, how can we work this out, to everybody's satisfaction without crippling the businesses with debt? Those might be pragmatic solutions, and a good lawyer solicitor might be able to help you to formalize that and to make sure that everybody has a clear agreement of how things are going to work moving forwards. So you can be collaborative about it as opposed to conflicting. Then, of course, sometimes people don't play ball. We all have known difficult people in our lives. And unfortunately, in those cases, you may have to either say, for example, get a court injunction to make somebody stop doing something. So stop selling something. That would be, of course, very unfortunate because it does involve a bit more stress and a bit more costs and all that sort of stuff. But it is the right thing to do. And if you have IP rights, there's no point paying for them then not using them. So like I say, if you are in the right, then your lawyer should be putting forward that case to the other side and explaining to them this is a serious matter. They too should get somebody to look at it from a legal perspective and give them advice about what to do. And 9 times out of 10, I would say, by that stage, things get resolved, hopefully before you actually have to issue proceedings, because when people realize the gig is up, the gig is usually up. And hopefully, that sorts most things. But yeah, it can be really difficult if you have a difficult character on the other side. And my heart does go out to brand owners who have to fight for it. But in the long run, that is how great brands are built. And there are no household brands in, when you go into your bathroom, you pick up the toothpaste, or you go into your shower, you pick up the shower gel. There are precious few brands that we encounter every day that don't have to do that once in a while. It is unfortunately a part of it. And that's why when people say to me, what's the price of IP? I sort of say, well, there's a price for filing a trademark, there's also price of enforcement. So always have a think about IP as a cyclical budget that I need to think about. How do I protect things? How do I enforce things? And sometimes, how do I let things go? People sometimes have brands that they've been using for years and they've evolved, in fact, and they're still paying for an old trademark that's no longer really fit for purpose. So I would say, do clean out your cupboard once in a while. And if you've been hanging on to trademarks that are no longer fit for purpose, there's no need to renew them after 10 years or whatever and be paying for them indefinitely. Focus on what's most valuable for your business. And again, audit that maybe every couple of years. Or more often, if you have a big brand refresh or something, you might say, well, now's the time to do that. Or if you're bringing in new packaging, for example, if you have a product, and I know a lot of your listeners might have products that be affected by incoming European legislation around, single materials and stuff like that are going to be more popular because they'll make recycling easier. So if you've got something like that happening in your industry and you need to evolve your packaging, it's an ideal time to think about the designs and say, well, do I need to protect these designs? Should I let my old designs elapse and not renew them anymore? So it's definitely, IP needs to be something that's a live part of your business if you're going to get the best out of it and if it's going to bring you great value and going to mean something that's a plus to your business as opposed to just a legal drain.
Yeah, and I think it's also important to highlight that it's not just for big companies. Small businesses need to think about this equally.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really important small businesses do think about it. Again, it can be very proportionate. You don't need to have, in-house lawyers. You don't need to have a panic attack about it. But I think it's great insofar as it can give an SME credibility for starters. It can help you get funding because you can go and pitch to an investor, because one of the first questions any investor will ask you is, well, how am I going to get my return on that? If somebody else can just take this idea and do it as well as you, why would I invest in you instead of them? So showing you have ownership in it. I think IP is also valuable because it gives your consumer trust in your product. It acts like a badge, not just of origin, but of quality. So being able to put your little or in a circle for your registered trademark, or being able to say, well, actually, this is a registered design and there's a new little symbol for D in a circle for European designs. So these are things that add credibility and consumer trust. So even small businesses can avail of that. And there's something else about it, and this is really interesting, that I think, people don't realize that IP can also help generate income. So if, for example, you have a great, say, food product, I have a lot of clients in the food and drink space. A lot of those food and drinks products are then licensed to other people. So for example, if I was thinking of, a whiskey product or a drinks product like Bailey's, may well be licensed to a confectionery company for putting into a sweet or something like that, or used for a recipe book. So there's licensing opportunities for people who have a great idea and want to allow others to access that idea. The same is true of patents. If you have a new invention, you might not be kind of keen to exploit it in all countries of the world, but you might be willing to allow others to use that innovation, and they just pay you an agreed royalty rate for it. So patent licensing is obviously one of the ways in which those massive FDI companies work, because they come up with these amazing technologies that everybody needs a bit of. So a lot of their revenue is coming from that intellectual property. And that's why, one of the, I suppose, shocking statistics for me that came out of the Central Statistics Office fairly recently when looking at productivity is that, IP intensive multinationals in Ireland have a productivity rate that's 8.5 times greater than our average Indigenous company. In other words, if I was working in one of the big tech companies like Apple or Eli Lilly or something, I might be, at a productivity rate of over €500 an hour. However, if I'm working in an SME, like many of our friends and our listeners, we might actually be earning a real rate more like €63. So there's a huge, huge disparity, about €480 of gap between the company that's using an IP-rich landscape and monetizing its IP to the max versus someone who's actually working with their hands every day. If I was to liken it maybe to dressmaking, I'd say, well, a lot of our Irish SMEs, they're there cutting out the material, sewing together dresses every day, whereas the multinational has learned to sell the blueprint or the pattern for the dress instead. So they're selling the same thing over and over and over because it's the intangible asset of that pattern that's the most valuable part. They're not actually even producing dresses. For example, they're just using the pattern to create value. So it's a really interesting thing that I believe small and medium-sized businesses, often the problem they set out to solve, or the solution they want to bring to the market, or the new service that they want to bring to the market, if they can see the value in that and think about how to monopolize it, how to get the best out of that, and build in IP from the start. Think about, what can I do to really protect this? I think that would change the business model of how we do things fundamentally in our smaller businesses, and move away from always just working for today, and maybe think more about, how can I, use this in such a way that I could exploit it a little bit more, get more value out of it, get more for the squeeze. That takes designing in. These things don't happen overnight. I don't think Irish businesses are going to transform overnight, but I think we could learn a few lessons that would help us, and that would help us create, easier to scale businesses. Because again, it's much easier to scale a blueprint than it is to scale building one house at a time. So if we can think about embedding some of those ideas, using the intellectual capital that people have, that's where your blood, sweat and tears has been created. You know what I mean? That's what's taken all that effort. So don't just kind of lose it or leak it out saying, well, I've got this product now, I'm going to put it on a shelf. It's like, hang on a second. The value that's really in that product is the process you put into developing it. Or if it's a service, the value in the service, it's not just in the delivery of that one day, it's in all the experience that that service provider is bringing to the table. So you have to really think a little bit differently in order to say, well, how can I protect that value? That's the part that's truly valuable. And if my brand reflects that, then people will consider that worth a lot more than if I, sort of gloss over all that and just put up a picture from ChatGPT or something generic.
Yeah, that's a great point, Mary. I didn't think about it in a way that IP would enable the growth and the scale in that sense that you explained. So that's a really great point and a really great lesson. We're nearly getting to the end of our conversation, Mary. Is there anything else you would like our listeners to learn or to keep in mind before we finish the episode?
Well, there's one thing that I'm always repeating, Roberta, which is that, we are, always keen to hear from your listeners and our friends in the Irish business community if they have any questions or queries. People often worry that having a word with a lawyer is going to cost an arm or a leg. And honestly, I have no intention of filling up my office with arms and legs. So, I just encourage people to ask questions and educate themselves. There's brilliant resources. Both the Intellectual Property Office of Ireland are always happy to provide some information and support, and the EU Intellectual Property Office have a fantastic website as well with lots and lots of training materials. And the EU Intellectual Property Office also have a wonderful grant for SMEs at the moment, which is called the SME Fund. Nice and simple, a little bit generic. I wouldn't have recommended that one, but there you go. It's certainly a very, very memorable grant because it is there to support Irish and other European businesses to get their first foot on the ladder and either help them and support them in getting advice, but also in terms of perhaps applying for a trademark or a design or even a patent. So my advice to listeners is, do have a think about it. Don't just rush out and protect something. Have a think about what's really yours, and then maybe think about the fact that you do actually have support options out there in terms of grants, in terms of education, in terms of picking up the phone to me. And, Murgatroyd, where I work, it's a lovely firm in the centre of Dublin. We're 25 years working in Ireland this year, believe it or not. And that's a great cause for celebration for us. But I would agree with you, there's so many Irish SMEs are yet, I suppose, maybe not using the IP system to the fullest extent. So for any of your listeners, I'm happy for 25 years of Murgatroyd to do 25 free IP audits. And for any listeners of your podcast, get on to me and I would be thrilled to do an IP audit for you without cost. Also, if you wish to point you in the direction of those SME fund grants, should you need anything further to that call. So, and again, that is open to all of your listeners and all of their friends too, because I think it's an important thing to spread this conversation and just make sure that people aren't missing out, really, and to make sure that they're not afraid of picking up the phone and speaking to, to me or one of my colleagues, because I would hate for it to be an off-putting factor that people are afraid of the law. And honestly, it's there to support them. It's there to be a help, not a hindrance. And that's really my main message is, we don't bite. We're here to help. And the people don't need to bury their head in the sand if they get a cease and desist letter as well. Same thing. Pick up the phone, ask for advice, ask for support. It's really important. And, it's important that Irish businesses know that there's a lot of goodwill towards them and a lot of opportunities for them in IP. And we're here to help.
Thank you so much, Mary, for the generosity, for the audits, and for the information about the grants. I'll make sure to put those links in the show notes. And if people want to reach out to you, where can they find you?
That's a great question. So I am based right at the kiosk at Leeson Street Bridge. So if anybody wants to drop in, I run free IP clinics every month, and you're welcome to come in and have a cup of tea and a chat. Otherwise, you can email me at any time. As I said, my name's common as muck, Mary.White, White, like the colour. And that's at murgatroyd.com. So the exciting factor there is Murgatroyd. So I'll spell that. It's MURGIT. Like, I guess, reminiscent of Snagglepuss, perhaps, from anyone who's old enough like me to remember cartoons. But heavens to Murgatroyd was his catchphrase. And I suppose, if anyone is looking for me, you'll often find me at Network Ireland or the local enterprise offices as well. So I'm always out on the road, Roberta, and I've got a lot of lovely colleagues here in Murgatroyd on the patent side. So just get in touch with any of us at our offices, and the number in Dublin is 01 661 3930.
Thank you so much. You are so good, Mary. Thank you for your time and for all the information you shared with us today. It was an absolute pleasure, and I hope to see you soon. Bye.
I hope so too. Bye-bye.
Bye. And that's a wrap for today's episode of Core Brands Podcast. I hope you found insight, inspiration, or even a little nudge to take action in your own brand journey. If you enjoyed this episode, I'd love for you to subscribe, leave a review, or share it with someone who would find it valuable. And if you want to keep the conversation going, you can find me over on Instagram at Design by Roberta. Thanks for tuning in, and until the next time.